When I was in Nigeria, I had an audience with President Ezekwe, and in Ghana, had an audience with President Kwame Nkrumah, and in Guinea, I lived at President Sékou Touré's oceanside home for 3 days. Nowhere that I went did I run into any closed minds or closed hearts or closed doors. I got a chance to speak to people at all levels, in government, in religion, and just plain in the street.
Legon at the University of Ghana, where he gave his first speech the first night he arrived, and Vicki Garvin and Alice Wyndham, Julian Mayfield, and I were able to set up a series of lectures, appearances. The first night, a number of people came prepared to have their fists balled up and their jaws clenched. Ghanaians. And Malcolm just simply told his story. And the people stood and shouted, and there wasn't a full house. The next night, there was a full house. 2 days later, there were overflow crowds in the street.
Assalamu alaikum. Mr. Moderator, our distinguished guests, brothers and sisters, our friends and our enemies. Everybody is here. Recently, when I was blessed to make a trip or a pilgrimage, a religious pilgrimage to the holy city of Mecca, where I met many people from all over the world, plus spent many weeks in Africa, trying to broaden my own scope and get more of an open mind to look at the problem as it actually is. One of the things that I realized, and I realized this even before going over there, was that our African brothers have gained their independence faster than you and I here in America have. They've also gained recognition and respect as human beings much faster than you and I. Just 10 years ago on the African continent, our people were colonized. They were suffering all forms of colonization, oppression, exploitation, degradation, humiliation, discrimination, and every other kind of Asian. And in a short time, they have gained more independence, more recognition, more respect as human beings than you and I have. And you and I live in a country which is supposed to be the citadel of education, freedom, justice, democracy, and all of those other pretty sounding words. So it was our intention to try and find out what was our African brothers doing to get results so that you and I could study what they had done and perhaps gain from that study or benefit from their experiences. The purpose of our organization is to start right here in Harlem, which has the largest concentration of people of African descent that exists anywhere on this earth. There are more Africans here in Harlem than exist in any city on the African continent, because that's what you and I are, Africans. The Organization of Afro-American Unity shall include all people of African descent in the Western Hemisphere. In essence, what it is saying, instead of you and me running around here seeking allies in our struggle for freedom, in the Irish neighborhood or the Jewish neighborhood or the Italian neighborhood, we need to seek some allies among people who look something like we do. And once we get their allies, it's time out for you and me to stop running away from the wolf right into the arms of the fox, looking for some kind of help. That's a drag. Number two, self-defense. Since self-preservation is the first law of nature. We assert the Afro-American's right to self-defense. The Constitution of the United States of America clearly affirms the right of every American citizen to bear arms. And as Americans, we will not give up a single right guaranteed under the Constitution. The history of unpunished violence against our people clearly indicates that we must be prepared to defend ourselves, or we will continue to be a defenseless people at the mercy of a ruthless and violent racist.
Leaps and bounds. Following his second African trip, he displayed a sophistication and understanding of the liberation struggles that were erupting on the African continent. For example, in the Congo upheavals, Malcolm attacked CIA tactics that had caused that nation's legitimately elected premier, Patrice Lumumba, to be deposed and then assassinated.
Congolese have been massacred by white people in the Congo for years and years and years. And if the shoe is now on the other foot, only thing I can say is it's like chickens that always come back home to roost.
Do you personally feel, though, that there's some shame or involvement here or some guilt associated with the killing of other human beings?
I think that the white people should be ashamed of the deplorable situation that has been existing in the Congo, which is not the fault of the Congolese, but which is the result of instigation by European powers who are fighting each other over the mineral wealth of the Congo. And now to make it appear that the Congolese themselves are criminals or brutes because they're reacting to these injustices that they've been victimized by is again ducking the question.
I was with him in Detroit once. I remember him talking in Detroit about the fact that Lumumba had been killed and Tshombe had been used as a tool to overthrow him. He was talking at that time about the CIA. He was talking about how people in major powers use African leaders. And he was comparing this to use of American black leaders by presidents and CIA and others.
Tshombe is the murderer of Lumumba, who was the rightful prime minister of the Congo. Tshombe is the man whose forces fought against the United Nations forces and against the United States. And despite this criminal past of Tshombe, now the United States is backing Tshombe, who has hired South African mercenaries who are hired killers to disrupt the peaceful efforts of the freedom fighters from Stanleyville to make the type of country there that they want. And it is this American support of Tshombe, actually, that's at the root of the whole problem.
He delivered a speech to his followers at the Audubon Ballroom that focused on an interesting part of his overseas trip, his stopovers in Paris and London. Perhaps more than any other speech, this one reveals the threat that Malcolm had come to pose to Western interests.
I was invited to address the first Congress of the Council of African Organizations in London. They had a 4-day Congress from the 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th, and had invited me there to make the closing address and bring the delegates from the various African organizations that are situated on the European continent up to date in regards to the struggle of the black man in this country in his quest for human rights and human dignity. And in conjunction with that invitation, I had gotten an invitation to visit Paris from the Afro-American community in Paris, which was sponsoring a rally in conjunction with the African community. And I was supposed to go there Tuesday also and address them and let them know the state of development or lack of development of our progress in this country for human rights or toward human rights. As many of you know, when I got to Paris, the man said I couldn't come in. Some man, French man. They gave me no explanation other than to say, we have our orders. They wouldn't let me phone the American embassy, and they tried to imply that the American embassy was behind it, which I told them that I didn't know de Gaulle had become a satellite of Lyndon B. Johnson. I knew that Kennedy had made a satellite out of Khrushchev and Britain and half of these other countries, but I didn't think that France was a satellite of the United States. Well, this made them angry.